this Green New Deal campaign. And I'm very glad to welcome you to this third session of a three-session series on a job guarantee. And the past two sessions have had some amazing researchers and organizers laying out different angles of a jobs guarantee and why it's such a groundbreaking potential priority for racial justice and climate justice in the United States, and getting into some of the main reasons why it's such an important priority and some of the tensions in envisioning the policy and how it might be possible to win it. So in the first session 2 weeks ago, we had speakers including researchers Fidel Kaboub, Sandy Darity, and organizer Sydney Gazarian, and Carrie Thompson, laying out the racial and climate justice angles and sort of framing the whole topic. In the second session, we had labor leaders Sarah Nelson, Carl Rosen, Kian Liberato, and Jody Ansel getting into some of the labor concerns and framings of the jobs guarantee and what it might take to actually win it and shape it in terms that improve conditions for workers in the United States. So there were a number of questions that were drawn out in these panel conversations, and the purpose of this third session is really to have all of you discussing some of the questions that were raised and laying out further uh, uh, possible ways to resolve some of these tensions. So we want to talk today more about how we can go about getting out the ideas that we've laid out about what a job guarantee should be, because there are many different versions of a jobs guarantee. Like what should make this version that centers labor out into the public more widely, and how do we resolve some of the hangups that people have around this policy and make sure that this is something that we can actually organize to win in a way that makes possible all the goals that we want within it. And what are the ideas and questions that jobs guarantee proponents still need to iron out? So in the first two sessions, we laid out some of the tensions between visions of a jobs guarantee that focus more on federal power to shape this versus more decentralized, granting more power to states. There are questions about the politics of it, like how does the jobs guarantee address the problems of worker polarization when more automation is happening, more heavy industries are pushing workers into low-wage service sectors, while managerial positions are automated? There are a lot of interesting questions raised. So without much further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker who will be introducing all of this and sort of just reframing the entire conversation before we go into breakout sessions. So Dr. Darrick Hamilton, we're really honored to have him here. He's a professor of economics at the New School, where he's also a founding director of the Institute for the Study of Race, Stratification, and Political Economy. He served recently as a member of the Economic Committee of the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force, and recently joined Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley at the unveiling of the federal jobs guarantee resolution. So I'll just hand it over to Darrick.
Thank you. And you mentioned that joint task force, and you all heard from Sarah Nelson. The other person on the economic team from the Bernie Sanders side was Stephanie Kelton. So the three of us, I think, made a formative team that advocated hard for federal direct jobs and ultimately the federal job guarantee. So let me start with context, and then also just to name the fact that economists have done a job of convincing the world that the discipline is strictly positivist and not grounded in norms. But we have values in our economy. A defining of value grounded in self-interested accumulation with no bounds promotes tribalism, and it's not necessarily natural. There are instincts in us to accumulate within ourselves, but we also have instincts about our common man, about common humanity. So, I just want to make the point that the values we choose are just that, values we choose. There's nothing strictly positivist about how we define our economy. So we can come up with an economy that promotes shared prosperity. By April of last year, our official unemployment rate had reached about 15%, and that's the highest it's been since the Great Depression. The unemployment for Black workers in April of 2020 was about 17% and 14% for white workers. This is an anomaly. Usually the rate for Blacks is about twice the rate of whites. But because of the pandemic, we made a moral decision to hibernate in-person work. And as a result, we had huge unemployment rates. But as we progress through the pandemic, the old adage of Blacks are first fired and last hired seems to be manifest again. If we look more recently, the current unemployment rate sits at 6%, with 9.6% for Black workers and 5.4% for white workers. And this unemployment rate that I'm quoting to you underestimates the economic toll of unemployment. There's underemployment, there's being out of the labor force, there's a loss of health insurance associated with the ways in which we finance health insurance in this country. There's mental and financial angst, and the pandemic more generally has taken a toll on us. Our despair and our disparity are dramatic. And this is the case whether we're in a pandemic or not. And we need to recognize that for the last 50 years, allowing marketized solutions as the approach won't cut it. Changes on the margins is not going to reverse that despair and disparity that I can cite, and you've heard ad infinitum. To reverse generations and decades of poverty, labor market discrimination, and economic and political concentration at the top, we ultimately need a bold overhaul of our laws and our economy. We're faced with a choice to continue down the path of deregulation, lower taxes on the wealthy, and a gutting of government services and social welfare programs, or make a profound change towards a more sustainable, moral economy with government interventions to facilitate the assets, economic security, human dignity, and social mobility for all its citizens, regardless of their race, their class, their gender, or their sexual identity. What do we know from the last Great Recession? We had the oxymoronic jobless recovery. We had growing inequality. We had housing insecurity. We had evictions growing. We had homeownership becoming less accessible. And we told millennials to wait out weak labor markets by going to school, and we saddled them with record levels of debt. And they're about to face a second scarring as a result of this pandemic. And then moreover, we were left vulnerable politically to a despotic strongman who was able to attain ascendancy through a divisive appeal of pitting one group of Americans against another. Although it's never fully been extended to Black people, the idea of the concept of economic rights, it's not new nor is it radical. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in his 1944 State of the Union address, he called for an economic bill of rights. He called for, quote, physical security, economic security, social security, and moral security. He knew that necessitous men and women were not free men and women. For Roosevelt, full citizenship demanded more than political rights. It required economic rights. And the first article of his proposed Second Bill of Rights was the right to employment. That concept of a federal job guarantee also has deep roots in our civil rights history. Martin Luther King pushed for job guarantees in the later years of his life, and Coretta Scott King has long led grassroots movements to champion the idea. We need new policies and policy frameworks that promote widespread economic security by ensuring that everyone can have a job, not just any job, but a good job with dignified wages, benefits, healthcare, and safe working conditions. That's what a job guarantee can deliver and will deliver. And it will tackle poverty by providing a viable alternative to the 40% of workers who earn less than $15 an hour with a minimum wage. Currently, stimulus plans that are championed by both sides of the political aisle, they focus too much on the use of tax incentives and deregulation to cajole or bribe a private sector to provide jobs and rebuild our nation's crumbling infrastructure. The approach leaves workers vulnerable to the whimsical nature of trickle-down employment and the instability of contingent work. Moreover, it is a transfer of the value of our public infrastructure, our public assets, to corporate interests with no guarantee that the infrastructure will be built in the first place. What a federal job guarantee would provide as an alternative would be a direct source of employment, and it would trigger multiplier stimulus effects across our economy and enable all workers, particularly those at the lower end of the labor market, to bargain for better wages, better benefits, without the fear and threat of destitution as a result of unemployment. It would eliminate working poverty. It would eliminate involuntary unemployment, and it would provide a public option of employment to better enable workers to bargain better wherever they are, employed or not. And it would also address our cyclical structural unemployment. It would also regionally direct resources to those areas that need it the most. So you have automatic stability across business cycle and across regions. It would structurally change the US economy away from low wage work towards more moderate and high wage jobs, and it would provide a buffer against employment transition that many fear as a result of automation or technical change. You know, some people argue, well, won't it displace low wage employment? To me, that is not a bug, but a feature of the program. If employers want to hire American workers, they have to at least offer them dignified wages and benefits and working conditions. Momentum is building. The idea and conception, it polls very well across Democrats, across Republicans, across blue, red states, and it polls like gangbusters when we look at minority groups. But regardless of polls, ultimately, if we want to achieve this, it's going to take a movement. It's going to take a social movement. And the good thing is that foundation has been laid. Groups like the Poor People's Campaign, when Martin Luther King was heading it, Sadie Alexander, the first Black economist, Coretta Scott King, and John Conyers, the late John Conyers, have all championed this idea. And we should give a big shout out to Helen Lax Ginsburg, who passed away late last year, and she was one of the leaders of the National Jobs for All Coalition. So this foundation is built, and currently we have on the political front Representative Ayanna Pressley recently championing the idea by putting forth a resolution to Congress calling for the establishment of a legal right to a job. Senator Cory Booker previously released a co-sponsored bill with such senators as Senator Gillibrand, Merkley, Senator Warren, and the now Vice President Kamala Harris to establish a pilot program to provide grants in order to demonstrate a federal jobs program. Senator Bernie Sanders has called for the full-scale federal job guarantee. We know religious communities have advocated. The current iteration of the Poor People's Campaign is putting it as, I'm confident and believe they are putting it as part of their budget and call for. We have leaders like Reverend Delman Coates of the Our Money campaign that are also seeing the moral case for a federal job guarantee. A federal job guarantee would restore psychological balance to those that are unemployed, who desire to work but cannot. It would address our longstanding unjust discriminatory barriers that keep large segments of stigmatized populations out of the labor force. And it would reverse the rising tide of inequality for all workers, again, by strengthening their bargaining power. And it would achieve an authentic full employment, not the natural rate that is normatively decided, but it would achieve a full employment and eliminate involuntary unemployment together. Local implementation of the fight for 15 minimum wage, it's indicative of an effective offensive strategy, but ultimately it's not bold enough. It still leaves many workers unemployed or out of the workforce altogether. It also doesn't address the volatility associated with not being able to choose how many hours you work or how long you will work, and the increasing precarity that's imposed on workers in our economy. Nor would it address our 21st century physical and human capital infrastructure needs, as well as our increasing vulnerability to natural disasters resulting from unnatural climate change. It would promote a care economy. To be clear, what I'm talking about is not welfare to work or workfare, but rather an authentic right to work with decent wages on a productive job that enhances our public, not only physical, but human infrastructure. What we have in mind is more than local job training and search assistance that do not ensure employment. Many of these skill building programs and workforce development initiatives, they still leave intact the structural barriers to employment. And workers would benefit a great deal more from skill building if, after going through job training, there was actually a productive job waiting for them. In my view, we shouldn't be investing in skill building unless we can assure that there's a job waiting for that person. The jobs could range from construction, education, health services, supportive housing. We could build libraries. We could have a care economy with childcare, adult care, elder care. We can promote arts and culture, and we could transform our cities to green, emission-free municipalities that are more resilient and sustainable. The work could include disability-centered advocacy to facilitate more long-term solutions towards dignified employment, livability, and financial independence. Similarly, the programs could be designed to emphasize transitions from employment of those that have been formerly incarcerated. We could have provisions for high-quality universal pre-K. We can use the federal government. We can use states. We can use Indian nations, local municipalities, community councils. They can come together and demonstrate inventory needs of where the needs are and where jobs should be distributed. Priority would be given to the most urgent projects, and aid would go to the most distressed communities. The work would address our 21st century infrastructure needs, and the projects would produce tangible public benefits. Full-time workers could receive medical coverage, retirement, paid family and sick leave, and the income that comes from this employment would provide greater stability for vulnerable state and municipal budgets that certainly go through cyclical counter cycles as a result from economic downturns. It would reduce the need to bail out the financial sector when there's a financial crisis. That moral hazard that's associated with too big to fail could go away because we would have in place something for mainstream workers so they wouldn't be vulnerable to an economic downturn. We need ultimately to reject the empirically unsubstantiated and even racist rhetoric that ignorance and so-called grit and personal responsibility are the sources of inequality in our society, along with the accompanying neoliberal paternalism in which government attempts to coerce and incentivize insinuated defective people to behave more accordingly and act more market-like in order to address our inequality. Instead, we need bold, transformative, anti-racist, anti-sexist policies that by design and implementation are intentionally inclusive of all groups, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or gender. Policies that ensure universal and quality access to healthcare, housing, schooling, jobs, financial services, capital, and the free mobility throughout society without the physical and psychological threat of bodily detention or harm because your identity is linked to some vulnerable or stigmatized group. Let's change this whole paradigm. Let's be bold. Let's work at federal, state, and local levels. Let's go into both progressive and conservative communities, and let's advocate for programs and initiatives like the right to a quality job that truly empower all people with economic security, dignity, and authentic agency to define and achieve their goals. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much for that framing, Darrick. Without much further ado, we're going to move into breakout groups now so we can discuss a lot of these questions. The way it's going to work in a few minutes, once I finish explaining it, you'll automatically be put into breakout rooms of, I think, somewhere from 5 to 10 people each, where for the most of the rest of the session, we'll be discussing these questions, including How do we go about getting these ideas out into the public more widely? Was there a way of talking about a jobs guarantee that particularly resonates with you or organizations or communities that you're part of? How would you describe a labor-centered jobs guarantee to somebody at work, say, or somebody you're talking to about why this is a good idea? What are some of the ideas and questions that jobs guarantee proponents need to iron out? How do we make the versions of a job guarantee discussed in these sessions the jobs guarantee that is understood more widely? And how do we win this? How do we link this to other social movements? So those are some of the questions to frame all this. Your Thanks to those of you who have to drop off. Please check out the sessions that have already been recorded and put online if you haven't already. But yeah, we'll be breaking out into the groups. And these discussions will last about 40 minutes, I think, and then we'll have closing from Carrie Thompson and Fidel Kaboub. So just hang on, and you'll be put into breakout groups.
If you're still in this room and haven't been, you should have had a pop-up window come onto your screen saying to join breakout group. Please click that link if you have one. There's a participant who got booted during this period. We should have breakouts. Okay.
To those of you who are just joining, we have just wrapped up an intro presentation, and now we're moving into breakout groups. So if you stay on, you'll be put into a breakout room for smaller discussions.
Okay, I think I'm going to stop the recording now.
Okay, sounds good.